Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another Propagandacast Lehr. Yes, indeed, you guessed correctly. It is the Propagandacast Lehr. If you were guessing, that is. Although, of course, if you weren't, that's hardly surprising either. The topic of the today, as you might probably all be aware, of course, is mortar basics. Yes, indeed, the sort of basics of some mortars. And, of course, this applies pretty much to any mortar in the game. German, Soviet, heavy, half-track mortars. Basically, most of the rules basically apply. Of course, they're overall breaching them. Of course, the sort of difference might be, in the case of the mortar half-track, it has access to incendiaries. In the case of the 120mm mortar, it fires a lot bloody faster and fires a lot bigger rounds. So those, for example, some of the differences, but overall, again, sort of employment-wise, they are generally the same. You set them up somewhere reasonably far removed from the front line, and then you have them blast bombs from atop and hope you kill someone with it. Of course, you can also use them to lay down a smoke barrage. Of course, I won't be going in so much into that, though again, we've got the smoke basics video out already, so you might want to look into that for sort of ideas on how to employ your mortar smoke. But generally, again, I mean, just sort of a brief reminder, you can use it offensively, for example, to cover up your opponent's front line before attacking, allowing you to get closer, or allowing you to get some nice target positions before he can shoot at you, or be used defensively to, say, cover up your troops moving away. In fact, we also know here a German mortar is up. Now, of course, this one is a bit smaller. Overall, there are basically also then two ways, sort of more specifically, the mortars can be employed while using their sort of main bit, firing off the high explosive bombs. And you might be asking, well, what are those? You basically have the regular fire, which we're seeing here, where the mortar crew itself automatically designates the targets and fires. That generally, by the way, also tends to be a lot more accurate than barraging, which is the other one, which in particular a lot of newer players tend to use of a lot. That is not to say it is bad, but generally there are different times to use auto fire and there are times for using barrages. And of course, that's rather what I really want to get into in this video. When do you do what? Barraging is sort of what you do when you don't quite have a clear idea where the other fellow is. If you can't see him, that is. For example, here, our German friend here wants to bombard the Soviet mortar. He doesn't know where it is, so he barrages the area. As you might be noticing, it isn't quite as accurate. It fires sort of reasonably fast, but I mean, rounds are likely to go all over the place. Of course, it's also why the other way you can use it, the barrage of this, is to break on the opponent's assault. You're not entirely sure, you just know it's going to come there. You bombard the area, thus ensuring your opponent can't move safely through. It can also be used to say, not just pause here, for example, there's going to be something happening here, but you don't quite know when, so you just barrage the area, ensuring, you basically block off there. You can do that with several mortars, in fact, laying down quite a nice little carpet of artillery, thus ensuring your opponent is less keen on moving through the area. So, of course, is another usage of it. In the bombarding way, I think the opponent is in particular he's nicely clustered up, making it harder for him to move through an area, breaking up an assault. He can also be used like that again if you see a large amount of his troops advancing. And then, of course, might be one, well, when do I use auto fire? Auto fire is generally sort of more used, when you can see it, and your mortar does, of course, can fire automatically at it. Generally, of course, there's always going to be rules to the exception, but generally, you have to see, of course, that way you can fire, but you might say, for example, during an assault you're attacking, then the mortar automatically just fires at the target, does so accurately, and has a generally nice chance in there knocking out some targets. Also means you don't have to bother so much with it, and can focus on your troops. It can be quite handy, as that way it also much more quickly shifts over to different targets. And again, note there, German mortar bombarded really didn't hit much. Auto firing, it generally did a lot better. Again, there are different times for doing that. It's not to say, okay, barraging is completely useless, but again, there are times for doing those different things. Very much so. So keep that in mind while, utilising your mortar, Granatenwerfer, Mercer, or whatever the devil you would call it. It's my bomb tomb, man. Yeah, whatever. So, keep that in mind, of course. In some regards, for example, the Germans do have a slight advantage in regards to when it comes to auto fire. Again, German crews being a bit more expensive, but also overall German infantry squads and such are smaller, so it's bigger. So again, in that regard, they also tend to have sort of that. Otherwise, the Germans would really be absolutely, utterly buggered when it came to mortar usage. But again, here, in this case, auto fire and always not fully accurate, but again, reasonably accurate compared to a barrage. And again, things like distance, also affect, how much the round scatters if you barrage. The closer you are, for example, the more you sort of have a chance of hitting. If you barrage. And there we go, now the German looks like we're going to be auto-firing, and I'm just using this game as sort of an example on it. And in fact, he's barraging by the looks of it. There we go, he's actually getting some kills now. Wunderbar. That's sort of, the differences between barraging, auto-fire, what sort of effect you get, and again, when to use it again. Generally, if there's one unit, unless you're sort of trying to sort of deny them from moving through area, there's not much point in barraging. For example, unless again, they're there, but you can't see them, in which case, barrage away. Hope you catch the bastards. If there's a lot of units, barrage in the hopes of capturing the bastards, for example, as well, and so on. Otherwise, auto-fire works surprisingly well as well. So that, for example, is a little thing there to keep in mind. Then, of course, we have the abilities. The German counter-barrage is, quite frankly, currently not really worth it. It's supposed to, sort of basically automatically begin firing at the opponent's artillery, but basically, it only happens if they barrages for starters. And, of course, again, considering the mortar, I mean, if the opponent has a 1 in 20 mortar, you're not really going to get much out of it. So in that regard, you're not really getting much effect out of it. If it's a Panzerwehr or something else, great, but again, for mortar. I mean, for the German mortar, it just doesn't make sense to have counter-barrage, and currently it's not really worthwhile. So generally, I'd not recommend it. It might sometimes pull off, but overall, not really. Comparatively, we have the Soviet mortar, with the much more impressive precision strike, which allows you to fire one round very much accurately at any target. Generally, it's best recommended against targets that, of course, not moving. That is, for example, to say, oh, I know where my opponent's mortar is. I'm going to call in a precision strike and wipe it up, because, again, in that regard, it rather ironically ends up doing better at counter-barraging than the opponent's counter-barrage ability. Yeah. Bit unfortunate, and hopefully something will change in the future. For example, also, oh, there's an MG42 which has been vexing me, the great Soviet commander. I shall now call in a precision strike and ruin its day. Also a method, or again, for example, there's a pack which is causing a huge large amount of fuss, or they just so happen to be noticing there's some fascists holding out quite stubborn in some cover, and they're not really moving a lot. Precision strike, oh, now they're gone. So in that regard, again, for the Soviets, precision strike really is quite the ability, and certainly easy to recommend. Counter barrage, not so much at the moment. But again, overall, as a German, for example, you will find your mortar a bit more accurate, overall lethal in auto fire. So I suppose in some regards, it's sort of mixed up for itself there. But again, keep in mind, there's a time for barrage, there's a time for auto fire. And in this regard, you might also sort of basically want to experiment yourself, so sort of get the feel of it, because ultimately, I can only sort of highlight the major points of it. Again, you sort of have to sort of get the ground feel of it. So again, so it's sort of, alright, this is the time for it, and this is the time for not to, barrage. But again, hopefully this will enlighten people as, to the differences as to when to do it, when to not. Hopefully get a lot more people to auto-barrage, because, again, a lot of new players do have a tendency of just barraging a lot. And it generally doesn't get so much out of the mortar as a good, more specific auto-fire barrage does. So, keep that in mind again when you're using your mortars, be they 8cm Granatenwerfers, 12cm heavy mortars, or 82mm medium mortars, or the mortar half-track, which of course also has the incendiary barrage, which I would recommend generally using against, large precision of enemies, in particular large precision of support weapons. Incendiary barrages in that regard are quite handy. So, and of course a little thing there on placement of mortars that also helps, generally you want to be a bit careful about how you place them. You generally want to be a bit careful about having them, for example, out in the open, usually a bit of heavy cover, so they're a bit hard to see, or behind a building is rather what I prefer, because again, then it's not easily, for example, to the opponent and just shoot at it. You want it to, be a bit hard to sort of find right away and get to right away. In that regard, for example, here is one of my favourite mortar spots, generally around here, or here, or here, something where, it's a bit safe. Generally you want something in front of it. Of course, you can pull up close to the enemy, but again, you have to be careful about it. Of course, with the heavy mortar, that generally tends to be a lot less of an issue, again, due to the fact it has quite the range. So again, you keep that in mind on top of everything. And of course, if it's the Germans you can capture it, of course, that is pretty damn magnificent. Huzzah! So, there you go, sort of the basics of mortar usage when it comes to company areas 2. When to barrage, when not to, when to auto-fire, when not to. A quick bit there on the smoke, and of course, different abilities between the two. And again, currently I would say, so it is sort of more directly useful compared to the German ones. Though again, I can also understand, again, considering how they sort of work, so doesn't quite balance itself out, and again, perhaps they might need something extra for counterbalance, but overall, again, at the moment, unless I somehow make another video saying all of a sudden counterbalance is okay, I'd recommend staying away from it. Just a little hint of advice there. So, hopefully you have learned something from this video, hopefully you've gotten a clear idea of how to use some mortars, and also a little tip extra, sometimes, getting another mortar up, and particularly say the medium mortar, if you already have one, having them auto barrels can really make it uncomfortable for your opponent, because then you really get a barrage effect, you get a battery effect on it, so one round goes in, another goes in. It makes it a lot harder for your opponent to move around. You can then also, for example, if you barrage, cover a large amount of territory, again, blocking off a gun. So that's also another consideration, a little tactic, but again, I'll probably sort of make a video more specifically about mortar batteries in the future. So, again, hope you learned something, hope you enjoyed it as well. I mean, that's great, and you hopefully were inspired to use your mortars better, with more interest, with more eagerness. If you did, why not subscribe, tell your friends, share it with everybody who you think needs lessons on mortar usage. If not, well, cheers, I suppose. And of course, to those going in, well, great, Dean, I really learned something awesome from the SS6s. By the way, that's cool. Just, don't send me in comments. I'm not sorry. I'm great. You're so enthusiastic. Christ. But, I can't really go through checking all your homework. Sorry, I'm not that kind of teacher. I'm the sort of one, that has faith in you, that you provide me a good replay, a good exciting 1 versus 1 or 2 versus 2, where really, put the most out of the SS6 and then send it in to me, something, I can show to everybody else. It's, just to say it quickly again, hopefully I haven't made you upset. But anyways, this is Imperial Dane saying cheers, and remember to use that Granatenwerfer, and it's not a Mercer. They called it a Granatenwerfer. Heinz, cheers.